good to go.
Okay, thanks, Iris. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, so yeah, thanks for the opportunity to discuss this with the group today. This presentation was originally developed for an energy and wildlife symposium that we provided a couple weeks ago. And so we've had some technical issues here with conversion of some IT. So some of these slides I wasn't able to update, but for the most part, they're pretty standard and shouldn't be too much confusion. So to kind of give you an idea, you know, compared to what Stephanie just discussed, Evergy is what's called an investor-owned utility. We have investors. We're a for-profit company, so we operate a little bit differently. The next couple slides, I kind of just want to introduce you to Evergy and kind of give you an explanation of what assets we have. We're a newly combined company as a result of a merger through Westar Energy in Kansas primarily, and Kansas City Power and Light primarily in western Missouri. So we're a new company and working through some things, technical issues of course, as well as trying to build relationships across the new company and decide or to better understand what kind of assets we have. So just basic statistics. From a distribution perspective, we have a little over 52,000 miles of distribution, almost 14,000 miles of transmission. We have several forms of generation from traditional fossil fuel generation to wind facilities to solar sites. So a pretty diverse asset across the two states. What I'm going to kind of go over today, the first bullet really doesn't pertain to this group because I don't really have to convince you that pollinators are important, but that's something I discussed with the Burns and McDonald group. What I want to focus on is really the last two bullets, the Monarch conservation implementation, how we're planning to implement it, how we're calculating acreage, what we're deciding to use as far as our acreage, our enrollment acreage, and kind of finish up with a couple opportunities that have been presented in the last 6 months or so on providing additional pollinator habitat in addition to what we currently already do. So I'm just going to go through these couple slides. These are some basic slides we've probably all seen, the importance of pollinators and really trying to gain not only public support or customer support, but also internal employee and leadership support. Some various efforts we've been involved in, much like NRACA, we came into the right-of-ways habitat group, specifically the Monarch CCAA in 2018 as a result of the potential federal listing. And honestly, our company as a whole has been doing native grassland restoration for at least the last 10 or 15 years. So another way for us to promote that internally and also to operationalize or get some credit for some of the good things we've already been doing. In addition to the range-wide CCAA, we're also members of the Kansas Monarch Conservation Plan. We were actively actively engaged in the development of that, and it really mirrors very similar goals, objectives at the national level, but primarily at the Kansas level. So really at the heart of what I wanted to talk about today is where we're at. You know, looking at enrolled acres versus adopted acres. This is primarily the slide that I wanted to update, but I can do that just by updating some of the numbers. So we've gone through a pretty substantial GIS analysis over the last 2 or 3 months, trying to determine or calculate the total acreage of both easements, lands we own, lands we lease, and that's been the difficulty has been exacerbated just simply because we're a newly combined company. So a lot of these figures you see on this slide are primarily what we consider legacy Westar. So that's the Kansas side of our new territory. So looking at just distribution, transmission, and generation figures, under transmission, on the Westar side, we're looking at about 59,000 acres that we're planning to enroll. Those are acres primarily under both subtransmission and transmission voltages. Of that, based on a GIS analysis, we have the potential to have monarch habitat or pollinator habitat on about 17,000 acres of that. And you look at the percentage, that kind of comes out at about 29%. Moving over to the distribution, we have estimates of about 19,000 acres we're planning to enroll. Of that, about 2,000 has a potential to be suitable habitat for pollinators. And then looking at generation, there's several things we need to still include on this, including our substations, where we put those, whether they're under distribution or generation or transmission. But under generation, you're looking at about 3%. So of that, these numbers have been updated a little bit. What we've done is new numbers have come in from the Missouri side of things. As expected, there's just as many acres we're going to enroll. So from this slide, our numbers increased to about 93,000 acres of transmission that we plan to enroll. And as expected, there's a lot less habitat available for monarch and pollinator habitat in Missouri. So the increase in adopted acres didn't move much. It went from about 17,400 to about 17,700. What that does, it does drop our enrollment percentage down to about 18.8%. So just right above kind of that threshold that we're all looking at. Comparing that to generation, or I'm sorry, to distribution, same thing. A lot more lines came in under the enrolled acreage, but very few opportunities for good habitat at present. So from adopted acres, we went from 2,100 up to about, let me see, 2,300 actually. So only a couple hundred acres. So that significantly dropped our distribution percentage down to about 4.1%. So we're in that ballpark. We think we can get this done. We're really in a good position, largely because we have so much native grass in Kansas, and we take advantage of that. We don't traditionally put much infrastructure in native grass as far as the larger tracts anymore, but a lot of these are 30 to 40-year-old lines that we work with landowners. They're largely grazing operations, so it does provide pollinator habitat in those areas. So kind of give you an idea, again, this is the Kansas version. This is kind of a GIS schematic of what our transmission and distribution infrastructure looks like. The blues and the reds are what we're going to consider transmission, and then the distribution is in the greens. And so this is just an acreage calculation of our total right-of-ways under these lines. And the next slide I'm going to toggle to is what's going to be the adopted acres. So that's going to be a subset of these. It'll be those areas that we have the potential for monarch habitat or at least creation. So I'm going to toggle down, and so this is what we think are potential areas of habitat. I'm going to toggle back real fast to show what the total enrolled acres will be compared to the adopted acres. So what really stands out to me is kind of that central area. Largely that's the Flint Hills or the native tallgrass prairie, where a lot of monarch habitat is likely anyways. I think, we don't spend a lot of time on yearly maintenance of that area, so that's really a stronghold for monarchs here in Kansas. I think where we have some good opportunities around the fringes of that, and then those areas that maybe are owned or operated by us or some of our partners like Kansas Wildlife Parks and Tourism, or some of our federal partners, where we can enhance some habitat that's already there. So as far as conservation measures, I think we have the opportunity as a company to address all of these conservation measures, and I'll just kind of touch base on some of them. So, pretty straightforward. The seeding and planting to restore or create habitat, I mean, that can come into play on what we already do as far as right-of-way construction restoration. If it's native grass, prior to our construction, it's going to be restored to native grass. Likely, it may have a higher forb component, depending on the landowners' conservation or property management objectives. Sometimes they spray for forbs to increase grass growth, but I think we're going to go back with our standard mix of high pollinator forbs as well as native grasses. Conversion of existing vegetation, we have some opportunities similar to what Stephanie was talking about earlier around our substations, some of our generation sites, and I'll be talking about that to finish up the presentation today. The conservation mowing, that's something that we have the ability to do not only on some of our transmission right-of-ways, but our larger generation sites where we have hay leases. We currently already have restrictions on when they can hay it, when they have to have the hay off by. So there is some regrowth. I think we can adjust those to benefit not only the monarch, but other pollinators. Targeted herbicide treatments, same thing, right-of-way management, grassland management. We have some pretty substantial land holdings around our larger coal plants. We have a couple, we have one also at a nuclear site. Both are about 10,000 acres total. And I think about 7,000 acres of that is native grassland. And so we lease that out for either grazing or haying. So we have some direct ability to manage that. The next two are kind of go hand in hand with that: prescribed burning, prescribed grazing. We have complete control over those leases and how they operate or manage our property. Brush removal is pretty similar. Standard right-of-way management through transmission doesn't lend itself well to high trees, so that really benefits that aspect of conservation. Same with the grassland management on our generation sites. And then simple set-asides, whether that's right-of-ways that we're not actively managing that year, or generation sites. We do lease portions of our generation sites to Kansas Wildlife Parks and Tourism, and they are managed specifically for wildlife. So there's no active agricultural operation on those as well. So where do we go from here as far as how we're going to implement this from a monitoring? So our totals right now still are sitting at about 30 to low upper 20s to low 30,000 acres that we're planning on adopting. So we're sitting right here at about a 50 to 70 samples annually. How are we going to do that? Well, I don't really say that. Admit I'm not really sure. That's going to be a pretty substantial coordination effort. One of the things I've talked with some other groups about, and not only just monarch habitat but other wildlife conservation, is to develop kind of a working group, and that's what we're in the plans of right now, to developing to really develop a plan to implement this effort, and to also kind of continue discussions. Some of the work groups or other work groups that we hope to include in this are our transmission substation construction group, of course. Our vegetation management touches on all aspects of the company. Our generation sites, our facilities being either service centers that have excess property around that we can do some beneficial habitat work, but largely probably our substations fall under facilities. A distribution group, some representative from there. Corporate communications, I think, will be important to continue to keep them apprised of our efforts, so they can promote that both internally and externally. And then also maybe Evergy leadership. And what I mean by that is someone that's maybe at the executive director or VP level, that we have a direct conduit to that level of oversight in our company that can kind of be our champion at that level to keep the other VPs and CEO apprised of what's going on. Kind of the take-home objectives of what this working group I hope to accomplish is to guide the development of the implementation plan, to more importantly facilitate communications between work groups to kind of knock down those silos, and really to look for opportunities. If you have a large company like many of us do, or a large agency, it's difficult to stay in consistent communication with those groups. They have their own way of operating. They know the pitfalls or where they have some weaknesses in communication, and I want those folks to be kind of the liaison of us, or this effort, to their group to provide information back and forth. So to kind of finish up, there are some opportunities that have come about, not only of what we've been doing here in the legacy side of the company, but also as a result of our merger with Kansas City Power and Light. One of the efforts that we're looking at is getting more involved in solar, primarily community solar sites. So this is a site in Baldwin City, Kansas, in eastern Kansas. It's about 5.5 acres. It's currently cool season, early successional annual grasses, whether it was planted or go back ground, probably being converted from farming over to more of a community or industrial use. It's our plan to use native grass for pollinator mixtures, with the potential to use some enhancements, local species or local seed collected at nearby community properties. The facility itself is near completion. This is a photo I took a couple weeks ago. As you can see, the solar arrays are installed. It's been mowed. Look, it's probably some early successional annual grasses, but primarily some cool season grasses. Another picture in between the arrays. We're pretty new to this. As far as solar facilities and the complexities of drilling or establishing grasslands, so I may be reaching out to someone else in the group here for some pointers. We're more used to wide open native grasslands or restoration sites where not a lot of much infrastructure or shading issues. Another opportunity that I mentioned earlier, primarily as a result of our merger moving into Missouri, this is our Greenwood Energy site. There is a solar array associated with this site. This particular location, you can see on the map, is a combined cycle combustion turbine location generation. But just north of here, it's a solar site that was developed several years ago. But in lieu of pollinator habitat, they went with crushed rock, which they're finding it gets very hot in the summertime and has the potential, or they're thinking it's deteriorating some of the panels. In addition to that, they're having some erosion concerns, and that's why we were called out initially to take a look at this area. But while we were out there, the superintendent wanted us to go take a look at another area just for the sheer number of acres that he has to pay to mow annually. So right now we're looking at converting this as a pilot project. It's almost 4 acres, again, currently cool season mowed lawn, converting it to native shortgrass prairie with pollinator habitat. Of course, that's a benefit on our side, trying to get more pollinator habitat, but from his perspective, it's an O&M cost reduction through reduced mowing. Pretty typical substation surrounding layout. Basically, it's a mowed lawn. Couple pictures. We're looking to convert that probably later this fall, early spring. Another similar opportunity, the same supervisor asked that we go take a look at this site too. It's in Pleasant Hill, Missouri. It's an old coal site, coal power plant that's now just been downsized to a combustion turbine location. It's almost 4 acres again, currently cool season grasses. There is some native warm season grasses. You can kind of tell in this next picture. Up closer to the bottom of the picture, you can kind of see the difference. It's probably some buffalo grass, blue grama, but again, the vast majority is native or non-native cool seasons that they have to mow weekly or maybe every couple weeks at the least. Some other pictures closer to a substation. So with that, yeah, I'll answer any questions we may have if time allows at the end, but I appreciate the opportunity to kind of explain this process or implementation from our perspective to date.
Great. Thanks so much, Eric. While I switch over presenters and presentations, I see Jamie posted a question in the chat box about converting mowed lawn to pollinator habitat. I don't know if you want to talk about that here as I switch over.
Yeah, let me see if I can find the question.
Basically, she was asking, how do you do it? How do you convert from mowed lawn to pollinator habitat? Just seeding, excavating?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like I said, we're fairly versed at converting large landscapes. our plan right now is to, because it is cool season, we're going to chemically treat the entire area within probably the next month. Our plans are to sow seed directly into that. Probably what we're looking at is, because we're going to have to broadcast some of that seed under the solar panels, we're probably going to have to broadcast that probably in December to take advantage of the freeze thaw, to get some of that better seed soil contact. The areas that we can get to, we're going to drill. That's typically a better success. And we may be looking at another chemical treatment probably early May, just to take care of some additional cool seasons that come up before the seed germinates. We've done a little bit of that on some other sites, but again, it's different for us. We've never had to do that in areas that are really mowed lawns, or so I don't have a great answer for that, but I'm hoping to use the experience and expertise of other folks in the advisory group here to help with that.